In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to do pelvic tilts, and I'm also going to offer you a couple of modifications that you can make as you do your pelvic tilts. So, in essence, you don't need anything to do a pelvic tilt other than some space on the floor around you, but there are ways of making pelvic tilts a little bit different to jazz them up slightly. So you've got some options. I'm going to give you the normal version of a pelvic tilt. I'm going to give you pelvic tilts with a block, and I'm going to give you pelvic tilts with a strap. So just like with any of my exercises, you are going to try and do the modification that just suits your body the most, whatever that might be. So I don't know, only you know intuitively which of these three versions suits you the best. Okay, so I'll just pop these to one side to begin with, and then we'll come back to them in a minute. So for pelvic tilts, we're coming to a hook line position, and we mustn't have towels in this hook line position because our pelvis needs to be able to rock forwards and backwards. So the number one thing, well, I say the number one thing all the time, one of the things I want you to think about as you do your pelvic tilts is, are my toes, ankles, knees and hips in alignment, okay? So that needs to try and stay like that throughout the exercise. So we're going to be rocking our pelvis forward, creating a little bit of an arch in the lower back. We're going to be rocking the pelvis backwards to kind of smush the lower back down onto the ground without the bum lifting up. I'll come to that in a second. Because you're going to be distracted with this forward-backwards movement of the pelvis as it rocks, you might forget about your knees and your feet. So I want you to think about them, but that's where the block and the strap can be really handy. So as we rock pelvis forwards and backwards, your knees, your ankles and your toes stay in alignment, okay? So alignment looks like this. It is not that, it's not that, it's not that. We're trying to make sure that the middle of our second and third toes, ankles, knees and hips are all in a straight line. And as we do the rocking of our pelvis, that our knees are not moving out to the side, they're not falling in, and the feet aren't adjusting, okay? So we're really trying to lock those legs in place. It's just the pelvis moving forwards and backwards over the head of the femur in the hip socket. So, palms facing up, arms relaxed, shoulders back and down behind you, head, jaw, neck, belly, etc., arms all relaxed. We're focusing on that breathing in and out of our nose and sending it to our belly. If this feels uncomfortable for you in any way, or if you feel like you're getting a big arch in your lower back and that your rib cage is coming up off the floor, or your head is tilting backwards, or your shoulders are really rounding up and you're like this, put a cushion or a block or two cushions underneath your head so that the back of your neck is long and that your upper body feels kind of open and comfortable rather than like it's really resisting this movement, which is a possibility. So toes, ankles, knees and hips in alignment. Most people need to be slightly more pigeon-toed than they think. What we are going to do is we're going to use the front of our hips, our hip flexors, to gently tilt our pelvis forwards so that we create a slight arch in the lower back. The rib cage stays grounded on the floor as you do this movement. So one of the mistakes that people make is that they don't use their hips to pull the pelvis forwards. What they do is they puff their rib cage up to force the lower back to create that like lumbar extension. So the rib cage is not going like this, and the lower back shouldn't feel like tense and tight when we're doing it. The movement is coming from like a pulley system here. The hips kind of tighten, pull that pelvis forwards. It's a smaller, more gentle, more mindful movement as ever when we're doing things properly. My rib cage is staying grounded. There's a slight arch in my lower back, but the movement is coming from my pelvis, not from my lower back and not from my rib cage. I'm going to try and move my pelvis as far forwards as I can before I'm sort of met with resistance or in some people's cases maybe pain. We're obviously not pushing things harder than your body can manage at the time being, but you are trying to find that end range of movement. And then you're going to squeeze your glutes, your bottom muscles here. You're going to squeeze them, and they're going to help slowly roll that pelvis back down towards the floor. And you'll feel how your kind of pelvis tilts backwards and relaxes onto the floor a bit, and that your lower back kind of slightly curves back down into the floor, and the bottom of the rib cage follows it. So that's the glutes driving the pelvis backwards to flatten. We're not lifting our bottom up here, so it's not a bridge, it's just a pelvic tilt. So your pelvis is staying on the floor throughout, although it is rocking forwards and backwards. So I'm just going to go through a few more of these movements so we can see what it looks like. You can see I'm doing this nice and carefully. I'm not going too far with the movement, and I'm really making sure that my glutes drive me backwards, my hips drive me forwards, like so. Things I want you to be careful of, once again, is what are your legs doing? Are they falling in? Are they falling out? Are you holding your breath? Are you squeezing your abdominals to shove you backwards, which is a possibility? So if your glutes have switched off and you can't control your pelvis well, you might really try and grip your abdominals to pull the pelvis down. And that's the kind of opposite version of the hips not working to move the pelvis forward, and the kind of lower back and rib cage trying to puff things up. So just make sure it's not the abs or the lower back area leading this movement. It's the hips and it's the glutes. So it's coming from lower down. So that's another thing to watch out for. Just make sure that this is a pelvic driven movement and not a torso driven movement. And the last thing to watch out for is that you're not really aggressively like pushing your feet into the floor. So your feet are sturdy on the floor, but you're not shoving them down to kind of create the movement through your pelvis. Okay, the pelvis drives the movement with the power of the hip flexors and the glutes. And as you do this, just really get a sense of like, can I wake up my glutes to push me back? Do I feel like it's my hips that are moving my pelvis forward, or is it my lower back? Does one side feel different to the other? So I've been doing lots of these recently, and they've become so much more bilateral. I don't think I realised how kind of wonky I'd got in my pelvis until I'd started doing these on a pretty daily basis over the last 3 months. So yeah, I'm really feeling quite different in this exercise of late. So that's what a normal pelvic tilt looks like. But I mentioned that can actually be quite hard to control what the legs and stuff are doing. And we can also get more out of the exercise by recruiting a block or a strap. So we've got the block, we're going to put it the medium way around in between our knees so that our knees are at hip width apart. And then what that block is going to do is it's going to help your knees not move out from side to side, but it's also going to help you wake up the hip muscles to help kind of drag you forwards in that beginning motion of the anterior pelvic tilt. So we can maintain a gentle squeeze on the block, like 3 out of 10 level of effort. Maintaining that squeeze there, it may just help you get a little bit more of an engaged and kind of active pelvic tilt, because this squeezing of the block and the engagement of the inner thighs is going to help wake up these hip flexors too. So you're squeezing the block there, and then you're going to squeeze the glutes to rock you backwards again with the block. Squeeze the block, drive the pelvis forwards nice and gently, squeeze the glutes to roll you back, use the block to drive you forwards, squeeze the glutes to drive you back. So that's one idea. You can do that first version, you can do the block version, or you can do the strap version. So this is my favourite because my glutes are weak, and this really helps me wake up the kind of sides of my hips and my glutes. So strap around the knees, a couple of inches above them. When we squeeze out against the strap, so we're going to be maintaining a constant squeeze out against the strap throughout this exercise, we're making sure that our kneecaps are tracking in alignment with our hips. So they're not narrower, they're not wider, they are in alignment with your hips. Maintaining a constant squeeze out at like a 3 out of 10 level of effort. And just before we get going with the tilts, just get a sense of, it's the outside edges of our hips, legs, hamstrings, glutes. It's this kind of area here that should be waking up in response to that strap. So the strap is going to help us keep our knees in alignment, but also help wake up the outside edge of our hips as we do this. So maintain and squeeze out against the strap. We roll the pelvis forwards and keep squeezing out against the strap. Then we squeeze our glutes to roll the pelvis backwards and flatten the lower back and the rib cage. Using the hips to roll the pelvis forwards over the head of the femur, squeezing the glutes to roll the pelvis back. So we're just doing a really nice steady movement here. I say it all the time. You can take these exercises far too fast. If you hurry them, you will miss the point of them. You'll miss the cues. You'll not be listening to your body. You'll be compensating. You'll be strengthening these kind of compensatory movement patterns that we're trying to get rid of, which will completely sort of negate the purpose of why we're doing these exercises. So just take your time with them and really try and absorb what the exercise can teach you about your body. So for me, like when I do this with a strap, firstly, it really helps wake up the outside edge of my hip, so I like that. And it really helps me get a sense of how my pelvis is almost like a heartbeat when it pulls backwards. It's like ba-doom, 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 because it's slightly wonky. But the more that I do this and the more that my glutes really switch on and burn, the more balanced my pelvis gets and the more fluid the movement becomes. So just as ever, take things slowly and mindfully. There is so much to be learned from every single exercise, but only if you take it slowly and you're not trying to just rush through and force things, because that is where the magic will be missed.